المطلوب شامل. Thank you, Shamil.
Speech will be also in English due to the international character of the conference. Suyur Faso.
Participants and observers. It is a great pleasure for me to greet you today here in Tbilisi, in the capital of Georgia, on the very first edition of the Future of the Black Sea Region Conference. This year, the conference is held in an unusual hybrid format, with very few participants sitting here in front of us and many more joining us online. The goal of the conference this year is quite ambitious: to create a foundation for an international forum, an independent platform to discuss the future of this huge region consisting of many nations pursuing different interests and willing to achieve different goals. But let's also be realistic. We will definitely not be able to find specific solutions to the problems and challenges that we face in the region. But I believe that our gathering here today will be a small but yet an important step for all of us to build how to build a more peaceful and prosperous future for the entire Black Sea region. The region today is in turmoil. The challenges that we face are immense and vivid. Right now, this very day, we're fighting a dual crisis: the pandemics and the economic challenges caused by it. The pandemics affected even this gathering. Many guests were not able to travel to Georgia, but we are happy that they were able to join us today here digitally. And the number of participants sitting here today is significantly reduced to comply with the current COVID regulations in Georgia. But COVID is definitely not the only challenge. The entire region is struggling to overcome different hybrid threats originating from different authoritarian regimes, both at home and abroad. These regimes struggle to undermine the very foundation and core values of the nations in the region, tend to corrupt and discredit the very ideas of democracy, human rights, and Western aspirations. The people in Georgia and Ukraine face existential threats in our struggle for liberty and independence of our nations. And last but not least in this trio of challenges is what our colleagues from Munich framed as Westlessness, especially in the eastern part of the Black Sea region. A few days ago, we commemorated the 28th anniversary since Sukhumi, the capital of Abkhazia, fell. The most painful day in Georgia's modern history. On this day, 28 years ago, hundreds of Georgians were slaughtered and hundreds of thousands became IDPs, internally displaced persons in their own country simply because they were ethnically Georgians. This day is a reminder for us what happens when the world, and especially the West, looks somewhere else. Tragedies like this are avoidable and should never, ever happen again. And that's why this conference is important. It is crucial for us to start thinking how to build a more peaceful and prosperous Black Sea region, to create a common vision and start implementing this vision. And I'm more than sure that we will make a small step in this direction today. And since we're talking about the future, and specifically common future of the region, I would like to greet the youth, the next generation of this region. This year, we created a special Fleece Fellowship for university students interested in international relations, politics, and security. These students developed their own works, their vision on very challenging topics, and I'm looking forward to their presentations tomorrow. And I also was very proud to see that among 24 fellows of this fellowship, there were more women than men. We do definitely need more women, both in security and international relations studies and in high positions. And I hope that this fellowship will contribute to this goal. I would also like to express my sincere gratitude to the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom for your outstanding support of both this conference and the Georgia Institute in general. Unfortunately, Peter Andreas Bochman, the chairman of the foundation here in the Caucasus, is not here with us today, but it is really hard to express our gratitude for his support and contribution, both to this conference and to the shaping of the Europe-Georgia Institute. I wish Herr Bochmann good health and hope to see him very soon in Tbilisi. I would also like to highlight the titanic work done by Shamil Shugaev from FNF up until this very morning, without whom this conference today would simply not be possible. And I would also like to thank the outstanding team of the Europe-Georgia Institute, led by our Executive Director, Shako Chkheidze, as well as our junior colleagues, Ratik Obachidze and Guram Jejanidze, for work to make this conference happen and exist. And last but not least, I would also like to thank Georgie Badridze, a brilliant diplomat and a wonderful person who is always supporting even the most ambitious of the EGI's ideas. At the end, not to spend too much of your time, I hope that everybody here will join us in our endeavor to create a foundation for a future of the Black Sea region. Now it is a very great pleasure for me to announce that this year's Fleece 2021 is officially open. Thank you. Also, I would like to ask Mr. Tengiz Pkhaladze, the moderator of the first panel, to join us today, and also the speakers of the first panel as well. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Georgi, thank you so much. My name is Tengiz Pkhaladze. I am Senior Fellow of the European Center of International Political Economy, responsible for the Eastern Partnership and Black Sea region. It's my pleasure and privilege to moderate today this session about the Black Sea, future of Black Sea, and its role in the context of European security. But before we start, let me express my gratitude to organizers, because this is really extremely important what you are doing, and the generation I see, because future of this region it depends on your mindset, your ideas, projects you are developing, and your enthusiasm. And I'm so happy to be with you and part of this discussion and part of this project. So today we are going to discuss Black Sea, current state in the Black Sea region, and perspectives for the future. The Black Sea, which is, let's say, hotspot, still remains to be hotspot in European security. The region which has been served sometimes as a bridge or the sphere for European cooperation, or sometimes has been a border between East and West. During the Cold War, it was considered as a border between the Soviet bloc and NATO, although Russia and Soviet bloc had advantage. After the collapse of Soviet empire, littoral countries expressed their impression and their will to join families of free and democratic countries. And today we see that 3 littoral countries are member of NATO, and 2 of them are member of EU. Ukraine and Georgia are aspiring to join those families, though they have territorial problems, and they became victim of Russia's military aggression. And of course, we have Russia Federation, which has special attitudes towards the Black Sea region, has kind of nostalgia about the Cold War order, and has quite serious ambitions to revert international order and ambitions for revenge. So today we are going to discuss those issues, and we have let me introduce our distinguished guests, distinguished speakers. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce Mr. Jelger Groeneveld from Netherlands. He is Secretary of Foreign Affairs Branch at Dutch ruling party, D66. He is also a board member of the International Cooperation Division. Jelger is mostly concentrate on the topics related to the East Europe. He is serving as a Secretary of Foreign Affairs of the party, and he is responsible for determining political agenda of the branch. So he is also very actively contributing in and writing for Civil G, and I'm pretty sure that many of you are quite familiar with his opinion and his op-eds. Welcome. My utmost pleasure to introduce you, my good and old friend, Georgie Badridze, my friend and my colleague. Georgie is a Georgian diplomat who held the position of ambassador of Georgia to Great Britain and Northern Ireland. At the same time, he is representative, or he was Georgia's representative in the International Maritime Organization. Right now, he fellow at the Rondelli Foundation, and invite also have our guests who join us online. My pleasure to introduce Mr. Ioannis Grigoriadis from Greece, who is Senior Research Fellow at Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy. He is an Associate Professor and Jean Monnet Chair of European Studies in Blinken University. Ioannis worked as Research Associate in Columbia and at Oxford Universities. He taught at Sabancı, Liszt with Athens Universities. Ioannis was Research Fellow at German Institute for International and Security Affairs as well. And he has published several books on topics of democracy, constitutional reforms, religion, nationalism, and political culture. Last but not least, excuse me, our distinguished speaker from Bulgaria, Velizar Shalamanov. It's my pleasure to meet you again. He's member of National Assembly of Republic of Bulgaria. He leads the Bulgarian delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of NATO. At the same time, he's a deputy chair of the Defense Committee of the Parliament of Bulgaria. Mr. Shalamanov used to be Minister of Defense of the Republic of Bulgaria. He used to be a member of different councils and advisory boards as well, until June 2021. He was chairman of the board of NATO Communication and Information Agency at Brussels. And I would say that he is the person who has deep and brilliant knowledge of the security issues, Black Sea, NATO, Euro-Atlantic sphere, and it's our pleasure and privilege to have, sir, today you with us. So let's start our discussion. And first of all, let me start with the literal states. And I would like to ask Mr. Shalamanov to describe current status at the Black Sea region. Once again, let me highlight that we have quite complicated situation. We have NATO member states, we have aspirant countries, we have Russia Federation. At the same time, let me remind you that during the last 30 years, there were so many initiatives and attempts to structurize and organize Black Sea cooperation. There were PSEC, it was Black Sea Harmony, and so on. And so many initiatives failed just because of Russia Federation. At the same time, since 2014, NATO developed strategy towards the Black Sea region. However, despite of so many statements and some tactical initiatives, we're still waiting for the strategy. What is your view about this process when we should expect the clear strategy about the NATO NATO towards the Black Sea, and how do you see the future of security of this region? Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I may want to use a presentation, it is very short, just talking points, but to structure what I want to say in a short period of time we have. So what I want to share, and first thank you for the invitation. It's really of critical importance for me personally and for Bulgaria to have enough opportunities for consultation with people like you on the Black Sea security, because we are not just a literal state, but we can see the Black Sea as a source of instability that is of critical importance for us. So context of the Black Sea security was already highlighted in introductory remarks and by your introductory remarks. I will focus on my experience in regional security cooperation and the key elements of change I see important in order to deliver tangible results and really to be considered as a reliable bridge instead of a point of tension. So context was as I mentioned, described, but in addition to NATO and EU, we see a very strong commitment from US that is of critical importance. And of course, there is a shift of interest to Pacific that started probably already in 2000, 2001. But still, especially when it comes to Black Sea, US are quite engaged with the developments here, and it is an important factor of stabilization that we could work to use most effective way for the benefit of all free democratic countries around the Black Sea. Russia and Turkey is the challenging aspect, and I put in both Turkey because Turkey is our ally in NATO. We maintain excellent relations, but still we see even today the Turkish president, Mr. Erdogan, is visiting Russia, meeting with President Putin along the Black Sea coast. And this type of relations are creating difficulties we to develop a Black Sea security strategy from NATO perspective. And I could mention different aspects, but for example, Bulgarian initiative to host Black Sea Security Coordination Center in Varna is kind of in delay because of internal consultations with NATO nations in the region. Of course, we have many other examples. When it comes to Russia, of course, this is our biggest challenge. And it is important through our cooperation to develop common understanding, common picture, to share information, to share experience, and to be able to speak one voice to our allies in NATO and European Union about all the risks that are stemming from Russian behavior and aggression in Georgia, aggression in Ukraine. There are some other elements that we cannot ignore. It is Iran, Middle East, North Africa, Afghanistan, and more active role of China, especially in Eastern Europe, but I'm sure you have your own experience on the other side of the Black Sea, because potentially through Black Sea and Danube River, we could provide a bridge between Asia, Europe, and even North America, but it cannot happen on the price of accepting influence over and above what is good for democracy and freedom of our countries. And again, I want to stress on regional cooperation because I see the key challenge here. And we'll give some examples, starting with what I practically experienced in my career. So Southeast European Defense Ministerium was started in 1996 with the focus of NATO membership of the countries in Southeast Europe. But it was really for Slovenia, Croatia, Montenegro, Albania, North Macedonia, Bulgaria, Romania, and this is achieved. In 2008, of course, NATO decided in Bucharest that Ukraine and Georgia will be NATO members, but it is not the focus of CEDEM right now. Even when CEDEM was extended to accept Ukraine and Georgia, but it was extended to accept Serbia as well, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And obviously Serbia is not aspiring for NATO membership. So kind of lack of focus in this format, and we have to rethink how we want to proceed. Black Sea 4 was a great idea in 2000. I was already deputy minister. We were quite enthusiastic to build confidence, but now it is totally broken because of the aggression of Russia and lack of opportunities to maintain this type of cooperation. Black Sea Forum, all of you remember, it's a great initiative from President Băsescu from Romania. We did several efforts in this area. I think it was a great idea for dialogue, but it's not bringing tangible results. So currently we have this Bucharest 9 initiative, but for one or another reason, it is focused more on the Eastern European countries that are already members of NATO and EU, and how to engage with Ukraine and Georgia that are considered as future members of NATO is something we have to find out the way for. And the initiative 3Cs that was initiated 2016, actually Bulgaria is chairing this initiative for this year, and the summit was in Bulgaria. It's a very, very important endeavor supported by US, by EU. It is, from my perspective, kind of Marshall Plan again for Eastern Europe, but it's not including Ukraine and Georgia. For good reason, our president invited the Greek president for the meeting in Sofia, and we could consider Greece joining this initiative of 12 nations, but how it is going to deal with relations with Ukraine and Georgia is something we to discuss and to find a way. The key point is that yes, all these regional cooperation initiatives, when they have a clear focus, they are bringing results. But we were not able for the last 20, 30 years, to develop a solid framework for regional cooperation that brings countries around the Black Sea. Obviously, we cannot expect Russia to be part of such a cooperation, focusing on the future NATO and EU membership of Ukraine and Georgia. And to a certain extent, we cannot expect Turkey to be very active and constructive in such cooperation, even because of the difficult relations between Turkey and European Union. But as I mentioned, even in NATO format, there is difficulty to reach consensus. And as we all know, in NATO, we cannot move without consensus. So we have to be very inventive to develop a format for regional cooperation that will include Ukraine and Georgia, together with Bulgaria and Romania, and definitely have US strongly engaged, plus key European nations. So conclusions, Romania is the most active country in all this initiative, and I'm a little bit surprised we don't have speaker from Romania, because I admire the vision and the will of our Romanian colleagues when it comes to Black Sea, and I know about their excellent relations with all the Caucasus countries, not only Georgia, but Armenia, Azerbaijan. As I mentioned, US is the key player in all these initiatives, and we have to be able to exploit this interest from US and to maintain this interest, but this will require one voice and cooperation between us. NATO is well engaged, but as I said, even with tailored forward presence, we have some difficulties that are not stemming only from our neighbor Turkey, but from Bulgaria as well. And it is very much related to the strong influence of Russia and kind of hybrid pressure from Russia over Bulgarian governments and Bulgarian politics to limit NATO presence in Bulgaria and to limit NATO presence in Black Sea. It is something that I put as focus of my activity in the parliament, to reduce this influence and to work together with Romania, together with Ukraine and Georgia, together with US, with other NATO and EU allies to develop such a strategy. And I'm sure in the new strategic concept of NATO to be agreed next year in Madrid, there will be a lot more for Black Sea. Bulgaria, as I mentioned, is quite passive because of mostly of the Russian influence and the Russian pressure over political life in Bulgaria. Obviously, Ukraine is the biggest country with a crucial role to play, and I want to see much closer cooperation between Bulgaria and Ukraine, Bulgaria and Georgia. The problem, as I see it, that geographically, Georgia is most isolated country, and without improving the status of harbors in Georgia and the use of Danube River as a main corridor for trade, this isolation will be generating difficulties for us. And I see EU and Baltic states are very active in the region, but they stay distant, and it is my personal opinion. Because if you want to achieve something, you have to be committed, you have to be on the ground, and you have to deal with security issues, not just economic, democracy, and other aspects. Key elements to change, and I'm speaking from my personal experience in the parliament recently. So maintenance of Soviet legacy equipment is something that we have to find solution. Bulgaria, Romania, even Poland, but we have to find a way to use this equipment without being dependent on Russia, Belarus, or any other close ally of Russia. Second, coordinated introduction of the new capabilities and the high level of interoperability and exercises between us to find a balance between US, NATO, and EU when it comes to build new capabilities. And because I used to serve in NATO Communication Information Agency for more than 10 years, and I know quite well NATO Support and Procurement Agency, I think ideally we, countries in the region, could use a more effective way multinational projects that are managed by NCIA, NSPA, in order to get modern, interoperable equipment that is not acquired just on bilateral basis and under economic or other pressure from one or another ally, but really based on the open criteria, what is best for the defense of our region. Definitely, we need closer cooperation in coping with the hybrid threats and building cyber resilience, because this is one area that could be escalated to the hot conflict very easily, and will be very difficult after that to resolve the problem. Institution building, I remember I was with the Geneva Center for Democratic Control of Armed Forces in the first seminars in Tbilisi a long time ago, and I know there is a Center of Excellence in Defense Institution building in Georgia, but this is extremely important, and I think it is challenge for all of us, and sharing experience and working on this is important. This will bring us to presenting the region as a bridge, as I mentioned. I see a lot of interest in US, in Western Europe, about using Black Sea, Danube, up to North Sea for a transport corridor, but this will require a lot of efforts on our side. And of course, based on our experience in Bulgaria, fighting corruption and organized crime is of critical importance. We have difficulties in Bulgaria. I'm sure everyone could speak for his own country, but it is something national responsibility, but we could do much more working together. In conclusion, the question is, could we cooperate better? And again, first is this Soviet equipment, the legacy, to be used without Russia and Belarus. It is something that we could rely on industrial capacity in Georgia, in Ukraine, and to have really agreed mechanism for transferring of this equipment in order to be used the most effective way, but at the same time to start more intensive process of acquiring new modern equipment with NATO level of interoperability. This will require definitely much closer research and development, education, training, cooperation in the area of security. And with the new NATO strategy for emerging and disruptive technologies in many different areas, big data, artificial intelligence, autonomy, space. By the way, space research and cooperation in exploration of space is critical for the littoral countries, but really in NATO EU context, not to be dependent on Russia. I mentioned already hybrid threats, but this is something that will require much closer cooperation on regional basis. I don't see it right now, so we have to find a way. This balance between US, NATO, and EU, because it is not possible to rely only on US. It is not possible to expect NATO strategy to solve the problems. And obviously, EU is quite interested, ready to do more, but very difficult in the process of decision making. And again, closer cooperation in countering corruption is something that could change the image of the region. It could bring us together. What I want to finish with is that for me, in this cooperation, building bridge among the countries, at least the free democratic countries in this region, the most important is defense cooperation. We experienced this in Sidon process, in the eastern part, western part of the Black Sea shore. I think if we could establish much closer defense cooperation between Romania, Bulgaria, Georgia, and Ukraine, in the context of NATO, in the context of strategic partnership with the US, and bringing this close to EU strategy for the region, this will help us to improve the situation. So sorry if I was a little bit longer than expected, but it is what I want to share, and very happy to hear comments, questions, and most of all, ideas from people in the room, especially young people. Thank you.
Thank you very much for such comprehensive and really very interesting presentation. I'm pretty sure that our participants have a lot of questions, and we will get back to those questions shortly. Especially, I would like to thank you for mentioning two very important dimensions: NATO new strategic concept and Three Seas initiatives. Both are crucial for the regional cooperation and defensibility. And in the next round of our discussion, we will back to those issues. Thanks so much. Now let me ask Helger. Your country is not the regional state, not the literal country. Sometimes I will be a little bit provocative. Sometimes Netherlands considered as a, let's say, very moderate or sometimes even skeptical towards NATO's enlargement or EU's enlargement. What is your interest toward this region? Why Black Sea matters for Netherlands or European security? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And first of all, thank you for inviting me here, having me here. Georgia is close to my heart, and maybe closer than to my heart than for most Dutch people. So that already illustrates your question. The Black Sea and Georgia is far away for many Dutch people, really far away. We're on the other side, basically, of the European continent. And that, yeah, I think your question already suggests that, yeah, the Netherlands is quite Eurosceptic these days, unfortunately. I say that explicitly. And yeah, that was recently in a talk that I had with some people in the Netherlands, illustrated, yeah, that there is really a distance. And it was also mentioned by Mr. Shalamanov in his presentation. When it comes to certain initiatives, like the Three Seas initiative, that the EU is quite distant on some aspects of that. And that is not only because of geography, but I think also on mentality. Somehow, the security importance of the Black Sea region hasn't landed very well yet. Well, it gets better, but it goes very, very slow in Brussels and the member states of the European Union, especially on the west side. I'm not talking about the eastern flank, because I think those have their priorities right, in my opinion. But yeah, that complicates certainly matters within the European Union to get policies aligned and get a kind of consensus. So that's why I think the Three Seas initiative that was mentioned before is a very important opportunity for the countries on the Black Sea or from the Baltics up to the Black Sea to join forces and coordinate with themselves, and not necessarily via Brussels. I think it's very important to just continue with this kind of initiative and to include Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova in this initiative. I think that's very important. And I think also the associated trio, as they have started to collaborate together, should proactively seek this kind of cooperation within the Three Seas initiative, not wait until they get invited, or just proactively seek this, because the Black Sea unites, is basically the bridge, as was mentioned, and is a uniting area also against the threat, the common threat of all actors, all countries along the Black Sea. And I think we all know which threat that is Russia. And unfortunately, it would be a better world if that wouldn't be like that. But unfortunately, we have to deal with that situation. And I think it's just for the better of all to join forces. When it comes to the defense or the military aspects, I think that is for the next panel better to discuss. As I look to the title. But when it comes to softer approaches on democratic development, crime, corruption efforts, as I mentioned before, I think that is very important too, because those are also the liabilities in the countries around the Black Sea that get Russia, for example, or other malign actors, maybe also China, who knows. So yeah, I think this is really important to continue this effort for a mutual collaboration. And also, I would suggest to push this into Brussels, into the brains in the people in Brussels. It's for the better for everybody, also for my country on the North Sea, because we are a trading country and we need reliable democracies with a good rule of law, in which our companies can invest in other countries. So it is of a mutual benefit for everybody. And even though it may not land like that always in those countries, like my country, that Georgia or other countries on the other side, on the far side of the Black Sea, they do matter for energy security as well. Not mentioned yet, but so yes.
Thanks so much. Absolutely agree. And I would say that we always feel this support from your country. And if this support exists, it exists because of values and because of economic interests. And Netherlands are very active, especially in Georgia, as we are here, when it comes to human rights, when it comes to reforms, rule of law. You're very active in economic cooperation. And definitely that could be the game changer, because the question when I always heard, be it in Brussels or different capitals, EU capitals, that why should our taxpayers pay for you? That's the answer, because we have shared values and we have mutual beneficial interests. And absolutely, I agree that EU and NATO member states need reliable, capable partners, and that's our common goal, to increase our capability. Okay, thanks so much. So it's hard to imagine and speak, discuss Black Sea without Greece. Greece, which has such long ties with the Black Sea. And let me ask Ioannis. Ioannis, you know quite well the region, you know particular countries. We already discussed, let's say, hard security threats, but let's pay our attention to the soft security threats. Right now, we are talking about democracy. Are those countries, I mean, especially aspirant countries, let's say, predictable partners? How do you see the future of those countries' political elites, and how important is that factor for the sustainability and security? Because security is not just a military security. Security is the security of our values, security of our society, and the main standard of EU and NATO is the security of citizens and security of society. So how strong is this society? How European is this society? And how this society can ensure predictability, and how we can together ensure security of our common European family. Please.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you today, even online. And it's a great pleasure and honor to participate in this very important conference. I will first answer your question and then share a couple of thoughts I have on the very important topic of the security situation in the Black Sea region. And in that respect, I will try to benefit both from my expertise on Greek politics, but also on Turkish politics, because I've been working a lot on Turkey too. So I'll try to give a dimension on how Greece and Turkey look into this trends, which are very important for both countries and the region as well. So we talked about soft security. Absolutely, it's a very important discussion. It is imperative for all international organizations and all countries to understand that undermining security is not just happening by military means. It can happen by informal, by virtual means. Like fake news, for example, is something that has been affecting all European countries. We know, for example, how Brexit referendum was affected by intervention of external actors, how many extremist parties in Western Europe are supported again from foreign actors so that they can undermine what we understood as the community of values within the Western community. And this is also involves Greece, and involves Germany. Almost all countries face this one way or the other. So securing the supply of accurate and reliable information is of primary significance for the functioning of any important democracy. So this is another struggle we need to have in our minds. Of course, since we talk about soft security, environment is another very important area of potential cooperation. And I'm talking about just the pollution of the Black Sea, which is again a very important parameter that affects all littoral countries and the environment beyond the littoral states of the Black Sea. But we can also talk about climate change. Like Greece, Turkey witnessed recently a series of catastrophic bushfires in summer, and desertification in big parts of the Mediterranean is a major concern for many states. Unfortunately, if something is not done very quickly, such issues will become more pertinent in the Black Sea region. And in that respect, I do consider the European Green Deal initiative as a major opportunity, both for the Mediterranean, but also for the Black Sea. The fact that the European Union becomes a global actor and a regional actor that realizes how significant is the threat, the security threat emanating from climate change for everybody in Europe and beyond its borders, is a great opportunity for all of us. So we can work on developing proposals that will highlight the security risks for the region emanating from climate change. And this can bring us closer and work together for some very important work of common benefit. But in order to better understand how this is possible, how the European Union can highlight policies like the Green Deal, I would like to dwell a bit on the concept of European strategic autonomy. I recently authored a piece for an academic journal, the Journal of Common Market Studies, that tried to explore the European strategic autonomy debate through the case of the Eastern Mediterranean crisis. So in that respect, I refer to what happened in the Eastern Mediterranean last year with Greece and Turkey showdown, and how Cyprus got involved, Egypt and other countries in the Eastern Mediterranean. So I think looking into this discussion is of primary significance, because we need to understand the European Union not through our wishes, but through reality. If we understand reality, then we can change it according to our wishes or according to our visions. And we need to understand that the EU is a work in progress. It's not finished yet. There's no clear position on a number of issues. Positions are produced through constant negotiations on multiple levels, intergovernmental levels, supranational levels, bottom-up initiatives, and so on. So I kind of highlighted in my article how many Greeks were disappointed by the fact that the European Union wasn't appearing to take the Greek and the Cypriot side on their confrontation with Turkey. So they felt betrayed, or they felt sort of disillusioned. But what I try to highlight there is, before being disillusioned, it's better to understand what the European Union is and how it works, and how national interests contribute to the production of the European interest. And to understand that, we need to look into how major European powers play a very important role. Of course, just like in NATO, consensus works in the European Union in the most important decisions, and security, national security or foreign policy issues remain within the consensus purview of European decision-making. But on the other hand, there are some countries that do have a disproportionate weight, and I refer, of course, mainly to France and Germany in that respect. And it is very important to understand how European decisions are made if we look into the dynamics of the relationship between France and Germany. it is of primary significance to see how, for example, post-war German economic and political elites have developed this militant, anti-militaristic attitude. This sounds like an oxymoron here, so you're firmly against any military involvement, even though the size of your economy and the size of your country may invite this. So if Germany is really committed to democracy and promotion of human rights, it should be thinking about having instruments to achieve this, and military instruments and hard security instruments are essential in that respect. Germany comes from that point of view, especially the Merkel administration kind of excelled in this policy. They never wanted to challenge this established view of German diplomacy of the last decades. France is a different story. France has, and let me highlight here also, because we talk about, of course, the elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room is Russia, and to some degree Turkey in that respect. Germany has very strong economic relations with Russia and Turkey. And the German business does have an important influence on German diplomacy planning, especially under the CDU. Now, we don't know how the new government coalition will develop following the recent elections, but it is a point to keep in mind. France's position is different. France doesn't have this strong economic relations with Turkey and Russia. And France doesn't have this very negative legacy of the Second World War, doesn't have to prove pacifist to itself and the rest of the world. France is more comfortable with using hard security. It's more comfortable in engaging in military operations around the world. We saw this in the context of the Eastern Mediterranean, where France's position was firmly closer to the Greek and Cypriot side, while the German position, again, appeared more neutral in that respect. Germany tried to build bridges and sort of reach de-escalation, which eventually was the case. But one can argue, and I'm maybe trying to argue this in my article, that these two positions are not necessarily antithetical. They might be complementing each other. So, like France and Germany may play the good cop and the bad cop against Turkey, for example, in the last year's crisis. But on the other hand, it is important to understand that they come from a different background, and the interests of the French and the German public opinion may be different. So selling a military operation to the German public may not be as easy as doing the same thing in France. So understanding this is even more important in the context of what we heard in the beginning of the introductory remarks of Mr. Merashvili, this discussion about Westlessness, the end of the decline of the Western world. So to the extent that the United States appears less interested in playing the security role it used to play in the Middle East, in the Black Sea, in Eastern Europe, and tries to save energy and forces to focus on the Eastern Asian or the Pacific front, this becomes a profound challenge for everybody. Like France itself suffered such a big disappointment with the agreement between Australia, the UK, and the United States last week. Like they thought that the United States, especially under Biden, would come up with a more cooperative and inclusive security strategy that would involve the European Union and major European countries like France. This didn't happen. And in that respect, I do find this as an opportunity. Like although, of course, we feel that there is a vacuum by American departure, and countries like Russia or Turkey may be trying to fill that vacuum. On the other hand, I think that this situation even increases pressure within the European Union and allows countries like France to make a stronger call for European strategic autonomy and the development of European military defense infrastructure. I don't know whether you followed the news. Yesterday, there was a signature between the Greek and the French government on the delivery of 3+1 frigates, modern frigates, and most importantly, a mutual defense support clause. So France practically pledged to support Greece in case it faces an attack by another country, of course, implying Turkey here, given the difficult situation in the bilateral relations and the exclusive economic zone disputes, or even some older claims by Turkey that some of the Greek islands islands in the Aegean are actually disputed territory, and are not Greek, but they're disputed. So I find this a very interesting shift because within NATO and within the European Union, two countries sign a mutual defense support agreement, which shouldn't be the case, right? If you're NATO members, like, you shouldn't be afraid of like other NATO members, but this is what, and understand that due to the developments in Turkey, and I would like to conclude my short remarks by referring to Turkey in that respect. Turkey's vacillations, Turkey's kind of like say second thoughts about being member of the Western Alliance, of being member of NATO, Turkey deciding to buy S-400s, reflect a discussion that used to be marginal in Turkey's security discussions 20 or 30 years ago. And at that time, interestingly, Tayyip Erdogan was the person that really crushed these initiatives and pushed Turkey towards EU membership. And Turkey appeared to be willing to embrace the European political and cultural paradigm. But this is long gone. Like, we're talking about a completely different situation now. And we're talking about a completely new domestic political constellation in the country, whereby the former enemies of the Turkish president are his close allies now. And these people, in light of new ambitions in the Turkish foreign policy planning, have been pushing Turkey towards a more independent strategic position. And in that respect, claiming a special relationship with Russia appears to be a point of interest in that respect. So you may have watched President Erdogan's interview to CBS a few days ago, and his disappointment about failing to meet President Biden. And in that context, we can explore and sort of interpret today's meeting in Sochi. So in that respect, we'll have to account for some instability coming from Turkey, as long as this transition process is happening, because Turkey is going through a slow transition. Like, it is clear that after more than 20 years in power, like, the Turkish public opinion appears to be having a fatigue with the current administration, and there are sort of like there are searches into the opposition. But this transition is going to be quite difficult for a number of domestic and international reasons, and this is likely to generate instability in the region too, unfortunately. I cannot preclude that. So in that respect, building close relationships between Black Sea countries and European institutions, or at least with some European countries that appear to be more willing than the European institutions, and I gave you the French example before, might be a way to think forward about preparing the ground until the time the European Union is fully able to understand that its strategic autonomy requires a strong position and sort of a vision for Black Sea security. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, and I absolutely agree that we have to look for opportunities that's necessary, especially in this hardship time, because talking about EU or talking about NATO, the both alliances has their internal hardships, internal disputes, and I think it's very time to show that Black Sea region is the region which can bring solution, can bring new opportunities for cooperation, which can serve as a new initiative for the cooperation. So let me now switch to the host country representative, Georgie. Georgia. Georgia, if we are talking about South Caucasus, this is only country with declared ambition to join EU and NATO, which is very important for the Black Sea security. Just a few months ago in Batumi was signed agreement between Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova about association trio, which is also a very important initiative. However, there are so many contradictions between the declaration and between the challenges we are facing and actions. From the at the same time, talking about opportunities, especially now when Europe is witnessing the new phase of energetic crisis and the prices on the gas is still high rocketing. This region ensures Europe's energy security. So what is our role? What is the role of this cooperation? What is the role of TRIO? And what is the current status of our security and correlation between our ambition and reality?
Thank you. As the last speaker of the panel, I have the benefit of excellent reviews offered by previous speakers. The views from Bulgaria, from the opposite end of Europe, the Netherlands, from Greece, and it saves a lot of time and detail. So I will basically base my presentation against the backdrop of the context that my colleagues already have laid out. Particularly, Mr. Shalamanov has actually described the whole history of the development of the Black Sea Security Cooperation. The only thing that I would add is that it was preceded by the first Black Sea regional organization, although not the security one, the BSEC, the Black Sea Economic Cooperation. So against this backdrop, I will develop and try to answer your question. And also I will add a question of my own, if I may. What the Black Sea Cooperation could have been, what the Black Sea role for the entire European region could have been, and why it is not or has not fulfilled its potential so far. And this involves, of course, the perceptions, the post-Cold War perceptions of Europe, of the littoral states, and Russia. We need to mention that very specifically. As the Cold War ended, it wasn't just Francis Fukuyama who triumphantly said that the history was over. It was the genuine belief by most Europeans, by most Western Europeans. They had no appetite, even during the Cold War, for geopolitics, but after the Cold War was declared over, they completely killed even the attempts to think in geopolitical terms. They were ready for cooperation. They were ready for peaceful, not just coexistence, but actual collaboration with the newly emerged or emerging democracies in the East, among which they genuinely believed Russia would have been the leading one. And throughout the 90s, we Georgians obviously experienced the signs that Russia had completely different kinds of ideas. And particularly after the year 1999, with the arrival of Mr. Putin to power, I mean, the picture must have been very clear even in the West. But whether they chose to ignore the clear signs, what Russia was up to, or decided that they could somehow coexist with this kind of Russia for their own benefit, that's another, the perceptions and intentions, interests of each of the parties. First of all, let's start from the Western Europe and the European Union in general. Well, I already mentioned, well, the confrontation with the rival bloc is over. We must start cooperation. We must start facilitation of further development of our Eastern neighbors. It's a matter of more recent history, but the Eastern Partnership is one of the manifestations of this attitude. The attitude that reflects the interests of the European countries and the EU in general. They want stable, economically developed, preferably democratic neighbors to the east. This is the basis of the interests of their societies, of their economies, of their security. And you cannot but agree with this. It's genuine and absolutely natural interest. And what we have seen on the part of Russia, we can speak about Turkey. And with recent developments, we may cast some doubts whether Turkey is consistent with its policies that it initiated in the early 90s. But in the early 90s, it was genuinely the force for stability and good. It initiated many, it made many attempts to contribute to development of economic cooperation among the Black countries. It was a force for good, for instance, in the South Caucasus, where it became an instrumental part of regional cooperation. The regional cooperation which actually gave Georgia an international function, without which small countries like Georgia cannot simply survive in the international system. But here you have Russia, which, to save time, I will just jump to the conclusion, has been consistently the main source of instability in the Black Sea region for one very simple reason, which very often was misunderstood in the West. To Russia, it turned out that the end of the Cold War was not the end of the confrontation. It wasn't the end of history. It was, at best, a ceasefire till it restarted acting in the spirit and in the context of the Cold War. Well, in the recent years, you have very clear signs of anti-access area denial strategy employed by Russia, pure Cold War tactics, right? And we need to discuss the motives without which we will never understand Russia's behavior. By the way, as a form of self-promotion, I strongly recommend you my recent paper, Google GFSIS, the sources of Russian misconduct, clear reference to George Kennan's great piece that explained finally to American leaders that the post-war cooperation with Russia, with the Soviet Union, was impossible for the Soviet internal reasons, for the basis of the Soviet political system, its ideology, and its needs, the needs of its regime to maintain a form of confrontation in order to keep monopoly on power, to find excuses for poverty, the rightlessness to its people. And we are experiencing almost the exact same reality in modern Russia, when the Kremlin regime basically finds excuses in the form of imaginary confrontation with the West, the NATO expansion, this and that, the evil designs in the West to turn Russia into some kind of what they call gay Europa, and many other things. Russian propaganda actually has excelled in many ways, and it's obviously even more efficient than the Soviet propaganda was. So basically, Russia's attitude towards the post-Cold War period, which has, by the way, ended, and particularly in the Black Sea region, was to prevent stable and sovereign independent states in the countries which Russia still considers as the lost territories. So the BSEC never really worked, including for that reason. The security cooperation in the Black Sea is doomed as long as Russia considers the access denial as its main goal. And the ultimate goal, as I said, is to prevent Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and further countries to the east from Georgia from emerging as a real sovereign independent nations, which actually, in a way, has negatively affected Russia's own economic and security interests. the problem with this is that, well, the Kremlin often doesn't care about the long-term Russian national interests when it comes to its own interests. And I said, the Kremlin's main priority is the preservation of the monopoly on power. And to that extent, it is prepared to sacrifice Russia's economic interests and the interests of its own stability. We saw that in the early 90s when Russia was prepared to risk insurgency in the northern Caucasus, when it actually incentivized and sent mercenaries from the North Caucasus to fight against Georgia's independence and territorial integrity. But who cares? Who counts how many people died in the following developments when we saw the spillover of the conflict and many other things. So what I'm saying is that you have a major problem in the Black Sea. I'm not sure the Western institutions have displayed adequate understanding of Russia's motives and Russia's behavior. And to conclude, what it could have been, not to end on the negative side. Actually, we have seen in the 90s a vision of regional cooperation, which opened up partially the Caspian region to the international markets. And for the first time, we saw the flow of energy from Azerbaijan and also from Kazakhstan to international markets via Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey, or towards the Black Sea. The South Caucasus could have been an instrumental part in a much greater cooperation with the Black Sea, whereas Black Sea would serve as a gateway, as a connecting mechanism for a sleeping giant, Central Asia, which till today, after 30 years from the collapse of the Soviet Union, remains an appendix to Russia. Some China are emerging, but again, I mean, China will never deliberately give Central Asian nations an opportunity to really become sovereign, prosperous, successful nations. It is through their potential so far unfulfilled cooperation with the rest of Europe, with the West, that these countries will fulfill their independence with real sovereignty. Give South Caucasus an additional international function and turn Black Sea into the greater area of cooperation. And this is what you mentioned, that our region already plays a certain role in security, energy security for Europe. Imagine if the gas reserves in Turkmenistan were available for the European consumers, which are now paying $800, right, for 1,000 cubic meters of mostly Russian gas. Speaking of Russian gas and two Nord Streams, I guess Mr. Putin is gloating when he remembers Vladimir Lenin's saying, alleged expression. Lenin is alleged to have said that the capitalists would buy the rope with which we will hang them. Well, the Germans have bought two ropes, and not only bought, but actually paid for these ropes. And today they are begging Russia to increase the supplies of the gas instead of trying to diversify. And this German attitude, I have huge admiration for Germany, this giant civilization, the pillar of Europe. But when it comes to German policies toward Russia, you cannot but wonder, how is that a European attitude when you so selfishly, very often against the interests of the rest of Europe, you do these shady deals with Russia that actually, and speaking of energy supplies, I have said it repeatedly, Russia has exported more corruption than energy, and particularly to Germany, right? So what I'm saying is that Black Sea could have been a great area of cooperation. It could have played a role in opening up Central Asia to the rest of the world. And it is not. Well, as a Georgian, I must add some self-critical element. Georgia could have played a greater role, but instead of developing its own infrastructure, for instance, up to this day, we still do not have a deep sea port on the Black Sea. We have wasted the last 9 years, all right? Instead of turning Georgia Railways into an artery of transportation, in the last few years, Georgia Railways have turned into a bankrupt organization. We have a whole lot of things to blame on ourselves, but what we lack, I guess, is a great vision in which Europe, the transatlantic cooperation, would view Black Sea as a region of greater cooperation with, including and most importantly, with the Central Asia. This is still on the cards. What it takes is a common effort and a more realistic approach to Russia's behavior. Once again, read the sources of Russian misconduct.
Thank you, Georgi. Definitely. The strategy is now the most important and strategic vision. And I absolutely share your vision. Even though till 2014, if not annexation of Crimea, that was the real wake-up call. Because after 2008, Russia's invasion to Georgia, Western countries, NATO member states, they had been developing quite successful military cooperation with Russia. And that led to the annexation of Crimea and invasion of Ukraine. Until now, despite that we're talking about Black Sea strategy almost 8 years, we still are waiting for the vision, for the strategy, for the proactive strategy, because all our steps are reactive. It's a reaction on Russia's new provocation or new invasion or new military engagement. That's why I absolutely agree. George Kennan's famous piece you mentioned, that led to the Marshall Plan and creation of NATO. I'm wondering if today the Euro-Atlantic community is ready for that. That's why I mentioned the new strategic concept and Free Seas initiative. However, I think we still have 20-25 minutes, and I think our audience is quite warm up enough for Q&A, and I already see. I know almost all of you, but please introduce yourself. I will take 3 questions, and then we will have next round of questions. So Alexei, Zaza, and please, Alexei.
Good afternoon,
and please identify the speakers the questions comes to.
I'm Alexei Melnik from Kyiv, and my question is about the strategy and the planning. So the strategy is quite clear. We want to build the Black Sea region as a peaceful area of cooperation. However, you talk about the difficulties of involving Russia, not even in cooperation, but in real dialogue, especially when it comes to such sensitive issues as Crimea occupation. So if you have to make your priority choice in your planning, I mean, having a strategy in front, what would you put on the first place? The suggestions, as you mentioned, in the long telegram, to consider Russia as an enemy or adversary for a strategic period of time, or to expect that somehow we can make Russia more cooperative, let's say in 10 or maybe 5 or 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Georgie Broderick. So, Zaza, please.
Thank you, Tengiz. My name is Zaza Bibilashvili. I represent the Chavchavadze Center. Thank you very much for your interesting presentations to all panelists. My question would be to all panelists. I I'd pick up where Ambassador Badridze left off. He spoke at length about Russia and its motivations and how the West's perception of Russia has changed, but the actions have not followed as swiftly as we would like. For years, many of us in Georgia have tried to demonstrate the motivations of Russia by drawing a parallel with the appeasement policies of the West in the 30s. Again, we remember some of the older phrases, but in the 30s, for some in the Western Europe, like the British Prime Minister, Czechoslovakia, which is now middle of Europe, was a faraway country that nobody heard about or knew about. Today, of course, Czechoslovakia is, like I said, in the middle of Europe, and the boundary has shifted. But that was the argument against appeasement. Many today think or get a feeling that what for us is an argument against appeasement may be an argument for appeasement in the Western Europe. An argument which cannot be articulated, because obviously you cannot say that, well, yes, we should have cooperated with evil back in the 30s, and maybe it's better to cooperate with evil today. That way we'll save ourselves some destruction, et cetera, et cetera. So is that something that you would share? Is that this like undercurrent, a policy of pro-appeasement? So when we're trying to tell them, well, that was the bad example, they're thinking, well, no, that was actually a good example, and perhaps Neville Chamberlain was right. Thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, thank all of you for your speeches and positions. Well, at least 3 speakers out of 4 spoke about my question. That's why I don't know which should I identify. I'll just ask the question. So my question is about the effect of German elections on the position of Germany towards Ukraine and Georgia. So I'll also share the disappointment in this way. Of course, I'm grateful for Germany for their support in social and economic terms, but their position in security terms, like in the framework of NATO, was obstacle. For 15 years, yeah. And I will just remind 2 points which are crucial for me. One is Bucharest summit decision, when even George Bush couldn't overcome the resistance of Angela Merkel against Georgia and Ukraine in terms of giving membership action plan, and mentioned we can I'll be straightforward. For me, it's kind of betrayal of Ukraine in Russo-Ukrainian conflict context. So my specific question is either any combination from your perspective in future government of Germany, which we don't know right now how it will end up, which can significantly change the stance of Germany towards Ukraine and Georgia in terms of NATO framework.
That's a question to all our speakers, or?
Well, I don't know,
Okay.
You can
thank you so much. Okay. We have 3 questions. So, please, who wants to take those questions?
I'd be happy to, if you like. First, what to do with Russia? At least we should not pretend that is not the option. By the way, this is what quite a few people in Washington thought in 1945, 46, 47-ish even. And for a while after the big actual Cold War was in place, a number of politicians tried to blame the confrontation with the Union with Stalin's regime. But you cannot pretend you can dance tango with someone who does judo moves on you, okay? When someone does ice, cannot avoid confrontation, whether it's on the international scene or in the street. When someone throws fists on you or tries to whack you with
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
For instance, at least after 2008, there should have been some political cost on Russia, without which the Kremlin interpreted that it was free to now move on to Ukraine. And it did. And every time Russia sees the weakness and every constructive step towards Russia, such as the reset or whatever buttons you push, Russia interprets not as constructive or goodwill gesture, it interprets as an opportunity, as a sign of weakness. Russia is not a mad, raw state. It is very pragmatic, it has a very pragmatic regime. Simply, the interests of this regime are not necessarily calculated in the same way as the politicians do calculations in the democratic countries. You need to understand this regime and the difference between the regime interests and the long-term Russian national interests. Yes, they are prepared to hurt, as I said, Russia's long-term interests in the interest of preservation of power. And this new project that has now developed in Russia, making Russia great again, is the project of preservation of Putin's power. Okay? And sadly, the large part of the Russian society is okay with it. It is prepared to consume the greatness, Krym Nash and other slogans, instead of better roads, better clinics, and better pensions. Okay? So this needs to be just taken into account. And there should be a principled, pragmatic, gives Russia a clear signal that its aggression, its misbehavior will have consequences. As long as Russia knows there will be nothing but the expressions of concern, Russia will keep acting in every direction where it sees softness. The appeasement, this more or less answers your questions. Yes, there are parallels. I have invoked them back in 2008 when I served as a Georgian spokesperson in London. I was trying to work. My interviews are available freely, in which I said literally, Russia, and I'm quoting myself again, so I'm very sorry. Russia is on the collision course with the West. And longer it takes for the West to react, deeper in the Western territory, this collision will occur. Ukraine is much deeper in the European territory than Georgia, okay? And Syria is further kind of in the European interest, and many other things. European elections and the US elections are much deeper, and it all happened. Although this may sound controversial, but I should try to say something about Mr. Chamberlain. His motives, at least, were much more noble than the motives of the appeasers of today. You can clearly see the corruption as a factor when someone cuts separate deals with Russia and then, based on these interests, kind of keeps Georgia away from NATO integration or acts in this way. And Neville Chamberlain genuinely believed that he was preventing a war by conceding a German-populated area of Europe which found itself just by accident in the territory of a newly found new European state. By restoring justice, he thought they were acting in a good faith. Of course, it was a mistake. It was an appeasement, which further provoked Hitler, and he did what he did. But the moment Hitler broke this agreement and occupied entire Czechoslovakia, the cooperation with Hitler ended, or at least appeasement ended, and Britain and France gave security guarantees to Poland. Exact opposite of what many European politicians are doing after one and many times when Russia broke agreements. I mean, they keep on appeasing Russia or keep on doing their own bidding based on their own, sometimes individual interests, not even national. And sometimes this is not just appeasement, it's collusion. Sorry to be so bold.
Well, I have to agree with just about everything. I think what my distinguished neighbor has just said about that. I will highlight basically one thing here, that Russia is an existential threat, an external threat, for as long as the current regime is in place. For its own survival, it is acting like that. So as long as the regime is there, we will have to deal with this kind of Russia. And we will never, we won't know yet what kind of Russia will become after this regime. But there, at least that's an opportunity for a positive change. So I would drop just the ball here that a regime change is necessary. And it will get me on the blacklist, maybe in Russia, maybe I'm already, but okay, whatever. But I think this really is a revolution or whatever is necessary to get Russia into a different mode. And for as long as that doesn't happen, we have to deal with the Russia in the way that my neighbor just described. And that brings us also to the subject of deterrence and in the defense and military sphere. The West, if I can speak for myself, from the Netherlands, West European countries haven't really been taking care of the deterrence in the eastern flank, especially in Ukraine and also in Georgia, of course. But I think, as was said, the invasion in Ukraine was the wake-up call. And under normal circumstances, with any other foreign actor, a military reaction would have probably been prepared. We have seen it in Kuwait, for example, with Iraq. Just an example. I mean, not saying that all that is should be followed, but because of Russia was there, there was no counter-deterrence, counter-reaction, and no further deterrence. Ukraine is not militarily helped, really. Well, there's some here and there, some things, but so I'll leave it at that. So there's a lot of naivety and lack of real pushback against this Russia. As for Germany and its energy and other concessions towards Russia, I think it goes a little bit deeper than that. The elections have it, will have its, maybe it will have its consequence in Russian politics, in the politics towards Russia. I'm not so sure about that, but okay. For example, from my country, was also through the backdoor influence, was also supporting Nord Stream, even though Parliament and the government officially didn't support that. One of the ministers, actually my party leader, I have to embarrassingly say, has been talking with Shell and has been accommodating Shell in this whole ordeal. And Shell is one of the financiers of this project, Nord Stream 2. So I think it goes a little bit deeper than just whether Merkel or CDU or whichever German government is in place. And so, yeah, it is about, I wouldn't say directly corruption, but it does go into the sphere of economical influence. And that is pretty large in the Netherlands. So I'll leave it at that for this moment.
Thank you very much. Velizar, I see your hand, please.
Okay, thank you. So I will go through the three questions. that under the pressure from Russia. Second, it is about yes, we are a member of NATO, we are a member of EU, but still there is not enough trust. And all our negotiations on Schengen agreement, on Eurozone recovery and resilience plan,
Recording in progress.
Two main challenges: energy diversification, and second is rule of law. So if we country by country are not able to overcome this dependence on Russia in energy sector, even in defense sector, and we are not able to achieve the high level of rule of law to fight corruption and organized crime, it will be very difficult to really move further with this cooperation. And last but not least, NATO actually developed this strategy since 2014. Of course, it will be formalized next year, but we have defense pledge, committing ourselves to spend at least 2% of GDP for defense. It is still not achieved by most of the countries. What to say about spending 20% for new equipment, new technology, interoperability? We have cyber pledge. Are we doing enough to secure our cyber infrastructure? We have a commitment to resilience, and this includes energy resilience, but transport resilience as well, emergency management resilience. Still a lot to do, fulfilling commitments. We have a new strategy for emerging and disruptive technologies in order to maintain our technological edge and to protect our technology from Russia, from China, to prevent the penetration of 5G networks that are dependent on Chinese technology. And last but not least, again, from 2014, we have this Readiness Action Plan, and NATO started to do this GRP, Graduate Response Plans, for Eastern Europe for the first time. Are we exploring all the opportunities that NATO is giving us? And I'm talking about the NATO and EU nations. So Bulgaria's NATO and EU nation has a lot to do more, and this could be, I will finish with this, when we finally agreed in Bulgaria to join NATO and EU, we decided that we have to behave as a NATO and EU member before we get invited. So this is the strategy. We know what is needed, we simply have to do it and have to build trust in order to cooperate in achieving these goals, and not to try to change Russia, but to limit our dependence on Russia, to eliminate all vulnerabilities that Russia is exploiting. And the main vulnerability is corruption and lack of supremacy of law. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ioannis. Thank you very much. I'll try to be brief, so we keep the time schedule. Let me respond to the two questions that I think I can make a significant contribution. The first refers to the significance of the 1930s experience and the importance of deterrence and sort of appeasement against Russia and versus Germany of the 1930s. My opinion is that no matter whether similarities are stronger or weaker, and we can have a discussion about that, I'm not sure that this kind of language is winning friends in many European countries, particularly in Germany. I tried to explain in my presentation that German identity has been defined very much against that terrible experience, which was terrible for the whole world, but for Germany as well. So I'm not sure they would like to be reminded of this. I think that what is important is to speak about the language of values and interests, why it is to Germany's interest to reduce dependency on Russian natural gas. And as I try to highlight, the European Green Deal puts this forward. The European Green Deal is about ending the use of hydrocarbons, right? So linking this policy to the policy of the European Green Deal, which was an important discussion in the German elections as well, in my opinion, can be much more creative and productive. And regarding the question about German elections, I can share the experience I have by studying Turkey as well. Like 20 years ago, the CDU was against Turkey's membership. Today, the CDU is Turkey's best friend in the German parliament. I can draw a similar comparison with the case of Russia. Why? Because the CDU never put emphasis on values, never thought of European enlargement as a sort of a goal in itself. It was much more pragmatic or cynical. So they said to Turkey, we'll never get you in, but we want to do business with you. And we don't care about human rights and how you behave to your minorities or to your dissidents. Well, Social Democrats and the Greens and the FDP were somewhere else. They were stronger supporting Turkey in 20 years ago when Turkey was showing goodwill and it was improving in order to join the European Union. But now they're against the German complacency against the violations of human rights in Turkey and Turkey's behavior in the region. And I do think that to the extent that this new mentality, the mentality of the German opposition, I refer to the SPD or the FDP or the Greens, becomes more prominent in the German coalition government. We don't know what the coalition is going to be, but I think the chances are that these opinions are going to be stronger phrased there. So in that respect, I do think that there is an opportunity for a more principled and adamant approach on Russia on all the issues we have highlighted.
Thanks so much. I know that there are other questions, but we are almost out of time. So let me just give a few seconds for final conclusions. So I'll give you 30 seconds to each of you. Velizar, for final conclusions, how do you see the future of the Black Sea region? I think we still have technical problems. So, Velizar, can you hear me? Ioannis.
I'll try to be very brief and just say that the security situation in the Black Sea region is anything but satisfactory. There are a lot of risks and crises around the Black Sea basin, but on the other hand, we have the opportunity to define the problems. I think understanding what is in front of us is the very first important step in order to find a clear solution. And a solution, to the extent that it comes to the European Union, also comes through understanding what the European Union is and what it can do today so that we can avoid disillusionment and false strategy planning.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, I think the short-term solution is enhancing further democratization and economic cooperation and more inclusiveness of the entire region for those countries who are willing, let's put it that way this time. Yeah, I think that's the most important aspect here.
What is your prediction about the future of the region?
For me, future of the region is to be a bridge between Central Asia, Europe, and North America. But for this, we need to strengthen our cooperation. First of all, our defense cooperation, research and development is NATO. Considering Ukraine and Georgia as future members of the alliance, and to use the current interest of United States as a key player that could counterbalance pressure from Russia and some specific interest of Turkey. But in long run, of course, it has to be put on the table in Brussels for the European Union because it is of interest of European Union to have economic development of the region and to maintain this as a region of connection with Asia instead of being border. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gil.
I want to make a prediction now, make you wish. I think that the Black Sea area, Shalamanov, has a huge potential of playing much greater role in connecting the rival regions from the Caspian, from Central Asia to Western Europe, and to be an area of cooperation and prosperity for all, unless approached with zero-sum perception. And this is what everyone needs to do. Georgia in particular needs to just strengthen its own institutions, democratic institutions, and its infrastructure to offer itself as a bridge and to develop its own capacity to do so.
Completely agree. We all have our homeworks, and we all have to work hard to be successful. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me to thank our outstanding speakers for brilliant presentations. I'd like to thank our brilliant technical team, our translators. Thank you so much, and I wish you a very, very successful conference. Thank you.